My name is Samantha Blake, and I just turned 33. I should have been smiling as I blew out the candles on my birthday cake in that elegant rooftop restaurant overlooking downtown Austin, a place I'd dreamed of for years. But instead, I sat there in my tailored dress, surrounded by flickering candlelight and the hum of polite conversation, feeling like I'd been punched in the chest. My mother leaned in, her perfume too strong, her voice deceptively soft. "Sweetheart, you've always been jealous of your brother." Something cracked inside me. After all the years of paying bills that weren't mine, of being the emotional and financial crutch no one ever thanked, of silently swallowing every slight, those words shattered whatever part of me had still hoped to be seen. "Then let him pay his own bills," I said, my voice even, though my hands trembled beneath the table. If you've ever felt like your kindness was being taken for granted by your own family, if you've ever been the one holding everything together while being told you're the problem, drop a comment, share where you're listening from, and please like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it, because I'm going to tell you exactly how I finally stopped being the family safety net and what it cost me to reclaim my peace. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood just outside San Antonio, my younger brother Dylan and I were close, 5 years apart but inseparable. He was charming, reckless, the one who could sweet-talk teachers and neighbors into anything. I was the quiet one, the planner, the fixer. I always thought it was my job to hold things together, especially after Dad left when I was 14. Dylan was only 9. Mom fell apart in ways that looked tidy on the surface. Still cooking dinner, still showing up to church. But something cold and sharp crept into her gaze, and I just stepped up. Babysitting, tutoring, working late nights at a diner before I could legally drive. I helped pay for groceries, paid my own school fees, covered Dylan's textbooks when Mom couldn't, and later, much more. But I'll get to that. That birthday night, the one where everything finally unraveled, didn't happen out of nowhere. It was built over years, quiet sacrifices, loud silences, and 100 moments where I should have said no, but didn't. And now, it was all catching up to me. In the next part, I'll take you back to where it really began. Before the resentment, before the exhaustion, back when I thought love meant giving everything, even when nothing came back. But before that night in Austin, before the candles, the wine, and the final breaking point, there was once something simpler between us. Back in San Antonio, Dylan and I shared a world that felt small, but safe. A 2-bedroom house with creaky floors and a yard littered with old toys and pecan shells. Summers meant bike rides until the streetlights buzzed on, and winters meant sitting on the roof with hot cocoa, pretending the stars had answers. We were different from the start. I was the straight-A student who used highlighters like paintbrushes. He was the kid who'd forget his backpack, but charm the teacher with a smile and a story. Dylan had this way of getting away with everything, his undone homework, his forgotten chores, while I silently picked up the slack. And it didn't bother me. Not then. Because he was my little brother. Because I loved him. And back then, love didn't feel like a burden. It felt like purpose. Everything shifted when I turned 14. I still remember the sound of Dad's suitcase wheels scraping down the hall, the way Mom stood frozen at the kitchen sink, one hand on a dish she never finished washing. "I'll be back," Dad had said. "We'll figure it out." But he never did. That night, something inside Mom closed. Not loudly, not with screaming or throwing plates, just quietly. She started moving through the house like a ghost with lipstick. She smiled for the neighbors, but at home, she turned brittle, and I knew, without being told, that I had to fill in the cracks. I started babysitting that same month. At first, it was just weekends, $10 here, 20 there, but by sophomore year, I was working 30 hours a week between a local diner and shelving books at the library. My friends were going to football games and school dances. I was learning how to stretch grocery money and fix a leaking sink. And Dylan? Dylan stayed Dylan. He slept in, missed the bus, made excuses, but he also hugged me when I cried in secret, made me laugh when the bills felt too heavy, and always believed everything would work out. Maybe that was the real difference between us. He had the freedom to believe that. I didn't resent it then, not fully. It felt noble to carry the weight. It felt like being strong. But over time, strength started to feel like silence, and silence started to feel like erasure. The first time I helped Dylan with something big, really big, was still a few years away. But even in those early days, the pattern had begun. I carried us both, and no one asked if I was tired. By the time I turned 18, I had learned to calculate a budget faster than most adults. While other girls my age were experimenting with makeup and road trips, I was clipping grocery coupons and tracking every cent in a spreadsheet I'd built myself. And somehow, I didn't mind. Because there was a goal in sight. Freedom. College wasn't just a dream for me, it was a life raft. When the acceptance letter from University of Texas at Austin came, I sat on the porch holding the envelope in both hands, the paper trembling as if it knew how much I'd needed this. Not only was I accepted, I'd earned a full academic scholarship, tuition, books, even a small stipend. It felt like everything I'd ever worked for had been seen. A silent acknowledgement of every overnight shift, every skipped dance, every missed Friday night. I didn't move into campus housing, even though it was offered. I commuted, 2 hours round trip, just to save money and stay close to Mom and Dylan, because even then, part of me believed they still needed me more than I needed space. Classes were intense, finance and economics by day, spreadsheets and cold brew runs at my unpaid internship by night. I'd landed a spot at Thompson & Wells, a private wealth firm where I fetched lattes and built client decks in the break room during lunch. It was exhausting, but it also felt like purpose with a paycheck just over the horizon. By my senior year, they offered me a junior analyst position before I even walked the stage. I was 22 and finally breathing. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was just surviving. I was building something, slow, steady, and mine. My first apartment was a 1-bedroom on the east side. Not glamorous, but clean. Safe. I bought everything secondhand, refinished a dining table I found on Craigslist, sanded it myself on weekends. There was no dishwasher, no laundry inside the unit. But it was mine, and I guarded it like it was the most precious thing I owned, because it was. Dylan, meanwhile, had started his first year at Texas State, majoring in communications, though I wasn't sure he knew exactly what he wanted to do. He called often, usually upbeat. Then one day, he called in a panic. "I can't buy my books this semester," he said. "Mom's tapped out." I wired him $600 that same night. No hesitation, no questions. I remember feeling proud. He promised to pay me back, said he'd get a part-time job after midterms. He meant it, at least in that moment. What I didn't know then was how that one act of generosity would open a door, one I'd spend years trying to close. That first $600 transfer felt good. Honestly, it felt right. I was the older sister, the one who always had a plan. If I could help Dylan stay in school, why wouldn't I? And he was grateful. For a while. After that, the requests came slowly. Little things at first. A birthday gift he couldn't afford for Mom that I covered, and he promised to split later. A busted radiator on his ancient Corolla that needed $450 to fix so he wouldn't miss class. A deposit for his first off-campus apartment senior year. I didn't blink, because each time, the reason sounded valid, reasonable, temporary. I believed him, because I wanted to. I remember one afternoon vividly. I'd just come home from work, heels in one hand, laptop bag in the other. Dylan called, voice upbeat, asking if I could cover a concert ticket he'd forgotten he bought. "It's just $120, he said casually. "I'll send it back Friday." That Friday never came, neither did the next one. And eventually, I stopped asking. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was doing fine. And I was, on paper. promoted to senior associate at Thomson & Wells by 28, handling portfolios for high-net-worth clients and holding my own in rooms where no one expected me to be. My credit was strong, my emergency fund intact. But behind the numbers was a growing truth I didn't want to face. I was beginning to resent my own generosity. Dylan graduated, moved back to Austin, and took a job in social media marketing. It didn't pay much, but he loved it. He said it was a stepping stone, and I was happy for him, genuinely. But the pattern didn't stop. If anything, it escalated. Birthday presents for him somehow cost more than the ones I bought myself. He needed help with groceries until the next paycheck cleared. Rent was late once, then twice. I'd find myself covering it without even being asked, just stepping in. Because that's what I'd always done. I told myself I was being kind, being family, being a big sister. But somewhere deep down, I knew I wasn't helping him grow. I was keeping him from falling. And every time I reached for my wallet, something inside me tightened. Just a little more. What I didn't realize yet was that my kindness was becoming a leash, and slowly, I was the one being pulled along. It was around 6 months before my 33rd birthday when Dylan lost his job. We were sitting on the balcony of my apartment in Austin, late on a Thursday evening. The city lights were glittering in the distance. I'd opened a bottle of wine, hoping to celebrate a small client win, but his face was unreadable. "They're restructuring," he said, picking at the label on his beer. "Cut half the content team." My heart dropped, but I didn't show it. "What's your plan?" I asked gently. He shrugged. "I've got savings. I'll be fine. The job market's hot anyway. 2 weeks tops." I wanted to believe him, so I did. But 2 weeks turned into 5, then 7. His Instagram still showed rooftop drinks, weekend hikes in the hill country, late-night takeout from places that weren't cheap. When I asked, carefully, how the search was going, he deflected, said he was being selective, that corporate culture wasn't his vibe. Then the calls started coming in at odd hours. First, it was rent. He'd fallen behind. His trendy one-bedroom in East Austin ran nearly $1,900 a month. "Just until I get something solid," he said. "I hate asking." So I sent the money. A few weeks later, his car was repossessed. "I meant to make the payment," he said, voice shaky. "But rent wiped me out and Uber's killing me." That same week, I co-signed for a used Toyota Camry at 9% interest. He swore it was temporary. "Nothing fancy," he promised. "Just reliable wheels to get back on my feet." I smiled while writing the check for the down payment, but something inside me felt heavy. It didn't stop there. Slowly, I began to realize Dylan had been on my Spotify, Netflix, and even my phone plan for years. A $10 here, $30 there, things I'd never tracked. But they added up. They always do. When I brought it up, he looked genuinely puzzled. "We're family," he said with a laugh. "I thought it was just kind of understood." Then came the utilities. He asked me to put his electric, gas, and internet on my autopay. "Just for a month or 2. My brain said no. My heart said nothing. My fingers typed in the payment info like they'd done it 100 times before. And they had. The most ironic moment? A week before my birthday, Dylan texted to ask if he could borrow $200 for a surprise gift, for me. I stared at the message, stunned by the absurdity of it, but I sent the money anyway, because at that point, what was another $200? It's strange how quiet resentment can be, how it builds in the corners of your life like dust you don't notice until the light hits it just right. And soon, that light was coming. By the time my birthday week rolled around, my bank account looked fine on the surface, but I had started skipping sushi lunches with my team. At Thomson & Wells, we had a tradition. Fridays meant sashimi and sake rolls at the spot downstairs, but I'd been bringing leftovers in Tupperware lately, chalking it up to a health kick. Jessica, one of my colleagues, gave me a sideways glance as she unwrapped her bento box. "Budgeting for wedding season?" she teased. I smiled, forced and quick. "Something like that." She didn't push, but I knew she noticed. People always do, when you start shrinking. My best friend Riley saw through me faster. We were sitting outside our usual cafe on South Congress, sipping cold brew under the umbrella shade when she squinted at me and said, "You look tired." I laughed. "Thanks. I mean it, Sam. You're pale, your eyes are puffy, and I haven't seen you wear mascara in 2 weeks. What's going on? Is it work?" I hesitated, stirring my coffee like the foam had answers. Then she leaned in. "Is it Dylan again?" That question, that again, landed hard. I changed the subject, because the truth was worse than I wanted to admit. I'd checked my credit score the night before for the first time in months. Down 41 points, my credit card, the one I'd always paid in full every cycle, now revolving. Minimum payments, interest piling quietly in the background like a slow leak, and all because I was too ashamed to say the word no. I used to lecture clients about the power of boundaries, about healthy debt-to-income ratios and emotional decision-making. I coached them through divorces, through sudden job losses, through death, but I couldn't even say no to a brother who hadn't paid me back in years. Then came the call from Dylan. Not to apologize, not to check in, to ask if he could bring his girlfriend to my birthday dinner. "Amber's basically family," he said, when I hesitated. "She's dying to try Café Mathilde." I recalculated the reservation in my head. 8 people, $85 a head. Add drinks, add her. "Sure," I said, clicking transfer on another $200 so he could buy me a birthday present. The irony stung. And then, just to round it all out, Mom called the next morning. "Did you order chocolate ganache for the cake?" she asked. "You know it's Dylan's favorite." When I reminded her I preferred vanilla bean, she paused. "Well, chocolate would make everyone happy, don't you think?" I changed the order, paid the $50 rush fee, and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor like it held some secret exit. Because somewhere between my generosity and their expectations, I'd completely disappeared. As I sat on hold with the bakery, changing my own birthday cake to suit Dylan's taste, I couldn't help but think about all the birthdays before this one. His 21st, an upscale club in downtown Austin, private table, bottle service, velvet rope. Price tag? $2,300. I paid every cent. His 25th, weekend getaway to Lake Travis. I rented the Airbnb, planned the itinerary, even bought matching t-shirts for the group. He posted a thank you story on Instagram. Didn't tag me. And mine? Well, mine were always practical. A slow cooker. Noise-canceling headphones for those long days at the office. Last year, Mom gave me a budgeting journal. I'd smiled politely, then went home and cried in the shower. Growing up, it was always the same pattern. Dylan got what was shiny, I got what was useful. And if I ever questioned it, I was reminded, you're the successful one. You don't need much. You've got your life together. As if stability was some kind of emotional disqualifier. As if having my life in order meant I didn't deserve to be seen. My apartment reflected that quiet sacrifice. It was cozy, yes, but carefully built. The couch? A floor model I waited 3 months to afford. The dining table? Sanded and stained with my own hands on a weekend I should have rested. I lived smart, because no one else was helping me do it. And somewhere along the way, I stopped buying things I wanted, because I was always budgeting for Dylan's next emergency. The week of my birthday, I opened my spreadsheet, the one I used to track my finances. There was a tab labeled Dylan. It wasn't new. It had just grown. I scrolled through the rows: rent, car insurance, grocery deliveries, birthday gifts for Mom labeled from both of us. And then I saw the total, $41,820, in just under 2 years. I stared at the number so long my eyes blurred. That was a down payment on a house. That was 2 international trips. That was therapy, dental work, a year of freedom. All gone, quietly, without thanks. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the Austin skyline glowing outside my window. I looked at the cake receipt in my inbox. Chocolate ganache, as requested. Everyone's favorite, but not mine. It was the smallest detail, but it felt like the final straw, and somewhere between that spreadsheet and that cake order, I realized this year something had to change. I arrived at Café Mathilde 30 minutes early. It was one of those rare, warm spring nights in Austin, where the breeze was soft and the city lights shimmered like something out of a postcard. The host led me to our private table on the rooftop, elegant white linens, candles flickering in crystal votives, and a view that made the splurge almost feel worth it. I had dreamed of this place for years. Now I was finally here, and all I wanted was for it to feel like mine. Mom arrived 15 minutes late, air-kissing my cheek like we were brunching in a Nancy Meyers film. Her bag caught my eye, a deep burgundy Prada satchel I'd bookmarked online more times than I cared to admit. "Oh, this?" she beamed when I complimented it. "Dylan helped me pick it out. He has such great taste." I forced a smile. My jaw ached from it. Dylan and Amber showed up 45 minutes late. No apology, no explanation. Just stories about some last-minute shopping detour and how the valet was chaotic. Amber tossed her coat over the back of her chair, showing off her new designer boots. 60% off, she chirped. Basically free. I watched the price tag flash in my head, $600 minimum. More than my entire electric bill last month, the one I'd paid for both of us. When the server came for drink orders, Dylan patted his pockets. "Ugh, I think I forgot my wallet." He grinned. "You got me, right, Sam? I'll Venmo you." I didn't even answer. I just handed my card to the waiter, the same card that was currently revolving a balance for the first time in my life. Over appetizers, I noticed the watch on Dylan's wrist. New, stainless steel, a bold blue face that screamed expensive. When I asked about it, he pulled his sleeve down. "Just a little upgrade," he said, laughing. Mom, meanwhile, clung to every word he said. She laughed too loudly at his jokes, interrupted me when I tried to mention my recent promotion. "Oh, that's nice, sweetheart," she said, then turned back to Dylan. "Tell everyone about that podcast idea you had." When someone suggested a family photo, Mom insisted Dylan stand in the center. She physically nudged me to the edge. "The lighting's better over here," she said when I resisted. It wasn't about lighting. It never was. And in that moment, I remembered another Christmas. I was 12. He got the game console. I got earrings. The same week my babysitting money, exactly the cost of that console, had vanished. Back then, I let it go, because he smiled so big and Mom looked so proud. But I never forgot. As the entrees arrived, I stared at my untouched wine glass. Dylan and Amber were giggling over something on his phone. "Jet skis," she whispered. "Lake house." Their voices trailed off, bubbling with excitement. "Dylan deserves a little break," Mom said beside me, as if reading my thoughts. "Job hunting is exhausting." I nodded slowly, and as the candles flickered across the table, I realized I was the one paying for his vacation, his rent, his wine, his life. And still, it was never enough. The birthday cake was beautiful. 3 tiers of chocolate ganache, gold-dusted edges, fresh berries arranged like jewels. It looked like something out of a bridal magazine. I should have felt proud, seen, maybe even loved. But all I felt was tired. The servers gathered, candles flickered, everyone leaned in. And just as I drew a breath to make a wish, Mom's voice slid in beside my ear, sweet as syrup, sharp as a knife. "You've always been jealous of Dylan," she whispered, smiling for the photo like nothing had happened. I froze. Her words didn't land like an insult. They landed like a truth she'd always believed. Jealous. As if everything I'd sacrificed, my time, my money, my peace, had been driven by envy, not love. As if all the birthday dinners, rent payments, silent compromises had been about him all along. and maybe, to her, they were. I looked around the table. Dylan was laughing with Amber, a half-finished cocktail in hand. Mom was beaming like a proud stage mom, and I, who paid for the cake, the wine, the room, was sitting in the shadows. Again. Something broke, but it didn't shatter. It crystallized. A sharp, sudden clarity that this would never stop unless I ended it. "Then let him pay his own bills," I said quietly. Mom blinked. She thought she'd misheard. I repeated, louder this time. "Let Dylan pay his own bills. Starting tonight." Conversations around us slowed. The clink of silverware against plates dimmed. Even the candles seemed to lean in. "Sam?" Dylan laughed nervously. "What are you talking about?" "Your rent," I said. $1,800 a month for the last 6 months, your car payment, your phone line on my plan, Netflix, Hulu, Spotify Premium, your electric, your gas, your internet, the credit card I added you to, the groceries, the birthday gifts you co-signed but never paid for, all of it." My voice stayed calm, too calm. "I'm shutting it down. Tonight." Amber's jaw dropped. "You pay all his bills?" she whispered. "All of them?" "She's exaggerating," Dylan said quickly. "Sam just helped out a little while I looked for work. No big deal, right?" $41,000, Dylan, I said, the number slicing through his excuses like glass. "That's not helping. That's enabling." "Sam," Mom hissed, "this is completely inappropriate. You're making a scene. On your birthday." "Yes," I said, standing up, "and for once, I'm giving myself a gift that matters. Freedom." She reached for my hand. "You're upset. We can talk about this later. Privately." "No," I said, pulling away. "I've been quiet privately for years. I'm done." Dylan's face was pale now. "The rent's due next week," he stammered. "The car." "I know," I said. "That's your problem now." I dropped 3 crisp bills on the table, enough to cover dinner, tip, and dignity. Then I picked up my purse and walked away, leaving the candles burning, the cake untouched, and the old story of who I was behind me. The air outside Café Mathilde was crisp, cleaner than I remembered. I walked to my car without looking back. Not at the glowing rooftop, not at the flickering candles, not at Dylan's confused face or my mother's clenched jaw. My phone buzzed inside my purse, over and over, but I didn't check it. Not yet. Instead, I drove through downtown Austin, letting talk radio and the glow of traffic lights drown out the noise inside my head. I didn't feel triumphant, not angry, not even sad. I felt free and terrified. When I got home, I kicked off my heels, changed into sweats, and opened my laptop. I stared at the glowing screen in the dark for a moment, letting the weight of what I was about to do settle in. Then, I opened my banking portal. First stop, rent. There it was, $1,800 scheduled monthly to Highland Park Apartments with Dylan Harper Rent in the memo line. I clicked Cancel Series. A warning popped up. "Are you sure you want to stop this recurring payment?" Yes, no hesitation. Then came the utilities. Electric, gas, internet, each on separate portals, each tied to my cards, each with login credentials I had memorized because Dylan never bothered. I removed my payment info, took screenshots, set service transfers back to him. One site warned, "Service may be interrupted if alternate payment isn't received within 3 days." That wasn't my problem anymore. The phone plan came next. He'd been on my family plan since college. 7 years of shared data and overages. I logged in, removed him as an authorized user, and submitted the transfer request. "User must establish separate account within 5 days to maintain service," the message read. Good. Let him handle it. Then came the credit card. I called the company, still open somehow at midnight. "I need to remove an authorized user immediately," I told the agent, "and issue a new card." The rep didn't ask questions, just handled it. I appreciated that. Final step, the spreadsheet. I opened the tab labeled Dylan. Rows and rows of transactions, dates, categories. I selected them all. Hit delete. The page went blank. And for the first time in years, my budget showed a surplus instead of a deficit. It wasn't just money, it was space, breathing room, a future. By 2:00 a.m., it was done. Every connection, every financial tether, severed. I closed the laptop, climbed into bed, and let my body sink into the mattress like I hadn't in months. And I slept. Not just rested, slept. Deep, dreamless, peaceful. Because for once, I wasn't carrying anyone but myself. The morning light filtered through my blinds, soft and gold, a gentle contrast to the storm waiting on my phone. 27 missed calls, 42 unread messages, 16 emails. The screen lit up like it was panicking for me. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, heart steady in a way that surprised me. I didn't open the texts right away. I made coffee first, fed the cat, tied my hair back into a bun like it was just any other day, but I knew it wasn't. The messages followed a predictable pattern, first from Dylan. Confusion. What happened last night? Then irritation. You seriously canceled the rent? Then panic. Landlord called. Utilities too. Are you trying to ruin my life? Then guilt. Please just cover this month. I'll figure something out. I swear. Mom wasn't far behind. Voicemail after voicemail. Her voice alternating between stern and trembling. How could you humiliate your brother like that? You think money makes you better? He's your family, Samantha. This isn't love. This is cruelty. There was no room for my side of the story. Amber went public. Of course she did. Vague Instagram stories. Nothing reveals someone's true character like cutting ties when you're no longer useful. Her captions dripped with passive aggression. Some people only give so they can take later. Watch for those people. Mutual friends started texting. Hey, what happened with Dylan? You okay? I saw Amber's post. Seemed intense. I ignored most of them. I didn't owe anyone a PR statement. But one message caught me off guard. It was from Brent, Dylan's old college roommate. Honestly, been waiting years for someone to cut him off. Tough love is still love. Stay strong, Sam. That one stuck with me. Not because it justified what I did, but because it reminded me I wasn't crazy. That maybe, somewhere along the way, helping had turned into hiding my exhaustion, hiding my boundaries, hiding my own voice. After a long shower and a second coffee, I did something else I'd put off for too long. I called a locksmith. The spare key I'd given Dylan for emergencies had become a silent invasion. Leftover food, moved furniture, a sweater missing, a charger gone, a door slightly ajar when it should have been locked. $300 and a new deadbolt later, I felt something I hadn't in years. Safe. By Monday, I had one more stop. I booked a session with a financial advisor. Not for my portfolio. For me. Barbara listened carefully as I explained everything. The debt, the depletion, the guilt. She didn't flinch. She just nodded and said, "You're in better shape than you think. 6 months of clean budgeting, and you're back on track." Her calmness felt like a rope thrown into deep water, and I grabbed it, because I was finally swimming for myself. That weekend, for the first time in what felt like years, there was no emergency. No panicked texts from Dylan, no unexpected charges on my card, no guilt creeping up behind every dollar I spent, just silence. At first, it felt strange, like waking up in a house where the refrigerator hum has stopped, unnerving because you've grown used to the noise. But then I realized this silence was mine. I did something small but bold. I went out to dinner, by myself. Nothing fancy, just a little bistro I used to love off South Lamar, where the waitstaff remembered your order and the music was soft enough to think. I ordered the mushroom risotto, a glass of wine, and for once, I didn't calculate how it would impact someone else's rent. Didn't worry if I'd have enough to cover someone else's car note. It felt radical and healing. On Wednesday, I was in the middle of a client pitch when the receptionist at Thompson & Wells buzzed in. "Sorry to interrupt," she whispered, "but Dylan Harper is in the lobby, refuses to leave." My stomach flipped. I excused myself, walked out, and found him pacing near the elevators, his face red, hair disheveled, energy frantic. "You need to fix this," he blurted out. "They're shutting off the power tomorrow. The landlord's threatening eviction. What the hell, Sam?" "I'm at work," I said calmly. "This isn't the place." "Well, where is?" he snapped. "You've blocked me, ignored me, cut me off. What am I supposed to do?" "You're supposed to be 30 years old," I replied evenly. "You're supposed to figure it out." His voice rose. "I don't have a job, Samantha." "That's not new," I said, "and it's also not my fault." Security approached. They didn't touch him, just stood nearby, a silent wall of consequence. He looked at them, then at me. And for a second, I saw it. The realization that I wasn't stepping in this time, that the net was gone. They escorted him out, not violently, just firmly, the way I should have done years ago. Back at my desk, I half expected judgment, but instead my coworkers dropped by one. Jessica left a coffee on my desk with a note. "You've been carrying something. I'm glad you put it down." And I realized, people notice more than we think, especially when we start showing up differently. That night, I lit a candle, curled up on my couch, and exhaled. No one needed saving. Not tonight. Not anymore. 1 week after the confrontation at my office, Mom hosted a family dinner. I wasn't invited. No surprise there. But later that night, my cousin Natalie called. She never called without texting first, so I answered. "Hey," she said slowly. "I just wanted to let you know what was said. At dinner." I braced myself. "Let me guess. I'm the villain?" Natalie sighed. "Dylan told everyone you blindsided him, said you cut him off with no warning and left him on the verge of being homeless." I didn't say anything. There was no point. "Mom backed him up, huh?" I asked flatly. "She did," Natalie admitted, "but not everyone agreed. I just thought you should know." I thanked her, and after we hung up, I sat with the silence. It didn't sting the way it used to, because something had shifted. I didn't need their validation anymore, but it still mattered to be seen. The next day, I made 2 calls. The first was to Dr. Eliza Coleman, a therapist my financial advisor had recommended months ago. I'd bookmarked her website. Never clicked schedule. Until now. We had our first session that Thursday. It was mostly intake, background, family history, goals, but even just saying the words out loud, hearing myself talk about the patterns, the guilt, the years of financial codependency, it brought clarity. "You've been playing a caretaker role that goes far beyond what's healthy between siblings," she said gently. "It might have started as love, but it became something else, something unsustainable." My second call was to Riley, the best friend I'd avoided since the birthday dinner. She'd seen the warning signs long before I did. We met for coffee at our old spot off Barton Springs. I laid it all out. Every dollar, every month, just this once. She stared at me, wide-eyed. "I knew it was bad," she whispered, "but I didn't know it was this bad." "Neither did I admitted, until I looked at the spreadsheet, until I stopped." She didn't try to fix it, didn't offer platitudes. She just listened. And that, more than anything, was what I needed. In the weeks that followed, I started reclaiming parts of my life I'd pushed aside for years. I rejoined a local book club, said yes to a weekend wine tour with coworkers, bought a ticket to a local theater production on a whim. Little things, small joys. But they felt massive, because every dollar I spent was mine, every choice, my own. And slowly I was remembering who I'd been before I became everyone else's safety net. About 3 weeks after that birthday dinner, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, but something told me to check it right away. "Hi, this is Greg Whitman, property manager for Highland Park Apartments. Dylan Harper listed you as the emergency contact for his unit. We've started the formal eviction process due to non-payment. Just thought you should be aware." His tone was flat, not unkind, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from hearing too many excuses. I didn't call back. There was nothing to explain, nothing to fix. But later that night, my phone lit up again. "Mom." I hesitated, my thumb hovering over decline, but something in me said, "Pick up." Her voice was sharp the second I said hello. "How can you live with yourself?" I didn't respond right away. She filled the silence. "Your brother is about to be homeless, Samantha. Homeless. And you, with your job and your nice apartment and your savings, you're just letting it happen." I took a slow breath. "I didn't let it happen," I said calmly. "I let him face the consequences of his choices. That's different." "You've always been cold," she snapped. "I used to think you were just practical. But this is cruelty." I closed my eyes. What she meant was, you stopped playing the role I liked you in. What she couldn't say was, you stopped funding the family fantasy. "I've sent Dylan links to rental assistance programs," I said, "and job listings. He has options." "He's your brother," she repeated, like that canceled out everything else, like it erased the $41,000, the missed birthdays, the tears I never let her see. "Yes," I said quietly. "He is, and I love him. But loving someone doesn't mean protecting them from growth." There was silence on the line. Then she hung up. Not a dramatic slam, just a quiet click, like the end of a lullaby you've heard too many times. I sat on the couch, phone still in my hand, and waited for the guilt. It didn't come. Instead, what rose up inside me was something new, not defiance, not righteousness, clarity, and peace. The next day, someone unexpected called. Uncle Mark, my dad's younger brother, who I hadn't spoken to in years. He said he'd heard the family drama through the grapevine. "I just wanted to say," he said slowly, "your dad would have been proud of you." The words hit me harder than I expected. "He always worried Dylan was being coddled," Uncle Mark continued. "He'd be glad someone finally stepped up." I didn't cry, but something in me loosened. The grip of trying to be understood by people who didn't want to understand. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had nothing to prove. 2 months after the night I walked out of my own birthday dinner, my life, quietly, steadily, began to change. It didn't happen in dramatic ways. No lightning bolts, no grand revelations, just small, consistent shifts. My budget spreadsheet looked different now. No more Dylan tab, no more surprise withdrawals, just clean numbers and clear categories. My credit card balance? Shrinking. For the first time in months, I paid more than the minimum and watched the interest stop eating me alive. I even made my first deposit back into my savings account. It wasn't much, but it felt like planting a flag on ground I'd forgotten belonged to me. I started researching vacation options. Nothing extravagant, just a long weekend in Santa Fe, maybe a cabin in the Texas Hill Country, somewhere quiet, somewhere mine. I hadn't done that in years, because for years I hadn't lived like my money was mine. It had always been ours, his, the family's. Now, I was making room for me again. News about Dylan trickled in slowly, like updates from a distant city. At first it came through mutual friends, then family. He'd taken a retail job, stockroom associate at a department store just outside Austin. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Mom called it beneath him, said it was just a phase, but I saw it differently. He showed up. He earned his own check. That mattered. Amber left him. Of course she did. Her Instagram quickly filled with photos from Tulum, a new boyfriend in a Gucci tracksuit, and captions about healing through elevation. Meanwhile, Dylan's socials went quiet. No more poolside brunches, no more borrowed luxury, just silence. And maybe growth. At a cousin's wedding, I finally saw him again. Mom kept her distance, cold and performative, introducing me to relatives like I was a guest, not her daughter. But others? They noticed the difference. Over dessert, Aunt Linda leaned in. "So that whole birthday thing," she whispered. "I thought you overreacted until I heard how much you'd actually been covering. Honestly, Sam, I'd have snapped sooner." I didn't respond, just nodded, because finally, they were starting to see it. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to know I wasn't crazy, I was just done. About 3 months after I cut the cords, after the confrontation, the silence, the fallout, I got a message from Dylan. No lead-up, no emoji-filled apology. Just this. Got promoted to shift lead, starting a financial literacy class at the community college next month. Not asking for anything. Just thought you should know. I stared at the screen for a long time. 20 minutes at least, reading those 3 lines over and over, not because I didn't believe them, but because I did. It didn't sound like manipulation. It didn't feel like a setup. It felt honest. And that alone was new. I typed my response slowly, deliberately. "Congratulations on both. That's genuinely great news, Dylan. I'm proud of you." I didn't offer money, didn't reopen the door. Just acknowledgement, respect, a boundary held. And to my surprise, he didn't push for more. No follow-up plea. No, "Can you help with this one last thing?" Just silence. But this time, a healthy one. A few weeks later, we saw each other again. Easter at my aunt's house in Round Rock. It was the first family holiday since everything changed. And while the air still held tension, the kind you could almost slice with a butter knife, it also carried something else. Restraint. Dylan showed up in a used Honda. No amber, no flashy outfits, just him. He helped set the table, brought a casserole, laughed quietly with cousins. He didn't dominate the room, didn't perform, and for the first time in maybe ever, he looked tired, but grounded, like someone who knew what a utility bill was, like someone who'd learned humility the hard way. At one point, someone asked about Christmas plans. Mom predictably jumped in. "Well, Samantha usually handles," but Dylan cut her off. "Maybe we should all contribute what we can this year," he said. "Split things a bit more evenly." He didn't look at me, but he didn't have to. The room went still for a second, as if the family system, long imbalanced, had shifted just a degree closer to center. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was acknowledgement. And sometimes that's where healing starts. 6 months after my 33rd birthday, my life didn't just look different. It felt different. The chaos had stopped. The demands, the constant financial juggling, the emotional whiplash of being the family fixer, all of it had quieted. And in that stillness, I started building something new. My credit card was finally paid off. My emergency fund was back to where it had been years ago. I set up automated deposits to my retirement account, and Barbara, my advisor, smiled during our last meeting. "You're exactly where you need to be," she said, tapping the table gently. And for once, I believed her. But the transformation wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It was my apartment, too. I repainted the living room, a soft sage green that made the space feel warm and intentional. I bought bookshelves and finally unpacked the novels I'd kept in boxes for years, hung up art from a local gallery, invested in plants I actually remembered to water. I swapped my second-hand coffee maker for one I loved, added a plush rug, even bought matching wine glasses, because I deserved beauty, not just function. The space didn't just reflect my style, it reflected my worth. Meanwhile, Dylan was still finding his rhythm. He'd moved into a small 2-bedroom in North Austin with 2 roommates. The apartment wasn't anything fancy, linoleum floors, no balcony, no view, but it was clean, quiet, his. And for the first time, everything inside it was his, too. He'd refinished a dining table from a thrift store, was budgeting, paying rent on time, even saving. His job, while not glamorous, had become something stable. He was supervising inventory and training new hires. There was even talk of him enrolling in night classes. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. We met for coffee one Saturday morning at a cafe halfway between our places. It was the first time we'd sat together, just the two of us, since everything. After a few minutes of small talk, Dylan looked down at his mug. "I owe you an apology," he said, voice low. "I took your help for granted. I thought, I don't know, that it was just what you did. And the worst part is, I didn't even think to ask if it was okay." I didn't interrupt, didn't rush to forgive or soften the blow. I just listened. "What changed?" I asked eventually. He shrugged, letting out a breath. "Having the lights shut off in the middle of January will do that," he said, half laughing. "Also, ramen gets real old, real fast." I smiled, not at his struggle, but at his honesty. Because finally, he wasn't performing. He was just showing up, like a grown man, like a brother, like someone trying. It took longer to rebuild boundaries with my mother than it did to rebuild my finances. With money, the rules were clear. Numbers didn't lie. Balance sheets didn't talk back. Budgets never gaslit you. But with her, it was trickier. She called less now. When she did, the conversations were stiff, performative. Weather, holiday plans, updates on distant relatives I hadn't seen since middle school. For a while I played along, polite, neutral, but every call left me with a headache. Every visit made my stomach tighten, because even if she didn't say it out loud, her tone still whispered, "You changed. You're selfish now. You let him suffer." And I had to remind myself every time that letting go of dysfunction isn't selfish. It's survival. The final straw came on a random Thursday afternoon. She forwarded me an email from her HOA about upcoming fees. No message, no subject line, just a forwarded bill. I stared at it for a full minute before closing my laptop. Then I picked up the phone and called her. When she answered, I didn't ask how she was, didn't offer small talk. I just said, "Mom, I'm not paying this, and I won't be paying anything else going forward." Silence. Then, her voice, tight and wounded. "So that's it? After everything I've done for you?" I could have argued. Could have reminded her that I'd covered groceries, rent, Dylan's tuition, birthday parties, vet bills, prescriptions, for years. But I didn't, because this wasn't about proving anything anymore. "I love you," I said calmly. "But love doesn't mean enabling. You're capable. And if you're not, then it's time to figure out how to be." She didn't reply, just hung up. I stood in my kitchen, phone still in my hand, and waited for the guilt. Again. It didn't come. Instead, what arrived was relief. Not because I'd rejected her, but because I'd finally chosen myself. And that feeling, it stayed. Weeks passed. No more surprise requests, no forwarded bills. It was quiet, almost eerily so. But in that quiet, I found clarity, peace, and most importantly, space to live, to breathe, to feel joy again, without the weight of everyone else's survival resting on my shoulders. One quiet Sunday evening, as golden light pooled across my apartment floor, I realized something that stopped me mid-sip of tea. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. My boundaries weren't just lines. They'd become the framework of something stronger, a life built with intention, not obligation. The silence from my mother had settled into background noise. The kind you forget is even there. Dylan and I messaged occasionally, quick updates, small wins. He stayed on his feet, and most importantly, he stayed accountable. No handouts, no guilt-laced, just this once requests, just mutual respect. It wasn't the sibling bond I once fantasized about, but it was real, grounded, adult, And that meant more. A few weeks later, I hosted a small dinner at my place. Just 5 people. No family. Only friends who had shown up in the mess, who'd sat with me on the bathroom floor, poured wine without judgment, and never once asked me to explain my worth. We ate pasta and shared stories and laughed so hard we cried. At one point, I looked around my candlelit living room, the sage-green walls, the soft hum of jazz in the background, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safe. Not because someone else had promised to protect me, but because I'd finally chosen to protect myself. Later that night, one of my closest friends, Vanessa, lingered behind to help clean up. As we packed away leftovers, she turned to me and said, "You know, you're lighter now." I raised an eyebrow. "Lighter?" She smiled. Not in a weight way, in a soul way, like, you finally put something heavy down. I didn't say anything. Didn't have to. Because she was right. When Vanessa left, I curled up on the couch, pulled a throw blanket over my legs, and whispered to the room, "I did it." Not out of arrogance, but out of awe. Because I'd spent so long believing that choosing myself would mean losing everyone. And yet here I was, surrounded by better love, stronger peace, and a future I was finally excited to walk into. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that healing doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, when you catch yourself smiling while folding laundry. Sometimes it comes when you walk past your phone and don't flinch, because no one's draining your energy through guilt-laced texts anymore. Sometimes it shows up in the mirror when you realize your eyes don't look tired from over-giving, but clear, free. I used to think being the responsible one was something noble, that it meant love, that sacrifice equaled worth. But now I know, love without boundaries isn't love. It's obligation, it's slow erosion. And you don't even notice you're disappearing until you wake up in a life that doesn't feel like yours anymore. Choosing myself wasn't easy. I lost people, I disappointed expectations, I shattered the version of me my family relied on. But in that wreckage, I found truth. I found peace in stillness, joy in simplicity, power in saying no. And I realized that the people who love you for what you do will always need you to keep doing. But the people who love you for who you are, they'll celebrate when you stop and choose rest. They'll applaud your boundaries. They'll pour you tea, not just take what's yours. I'm not perfect. I still catch myself slipping into old patterns. Still have days where guilt knocks, asking if I've done enough. But now I answer it differently. I remind myself that showing up for my own life isn't selfish. It's sacred. And I hope, if you've made it this far in my story, that you remember this too. You are allowed to redefine love. You are allowed to step back from people who only love you when you're useful. You are allowed to build a life that feels like yours, not theirs. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been the strong one, the fixer, the silent support, know that you are not alone, and you don't have to carry it all anymore. Please like, subscribe, and share this story. Because maybe, just maybe, someone out there needs permission to put themselves first too.